cannot operate on what seems good. You cannot succeed if you operate on what feels like a great situation. You have to do your due diligence. You have to operate on the facts. Welcome to the Spinoso Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Spinoso. My experience and expertise is in scaling all types of medical businesses to 7, 8, and even 9 figures. And I'm sharing my journey with you. This isn't a podcast telling you you should do this. I'm just telling you how I did this. I want to help you build your business, take ownership of your life, and become a better leader at home and at work. Let's get into it right away today, guys. I've got an awesome one for you today. Now, this is going to be the third podcast I've done on ancient myths for overachievers. I did one on the myth of Icarus and another on the myth of Prometheus. Now, you don't have to listen to those first, but it might help. However, previously I explained that I like movies like Braveheart and Gladiator. I like comics like Superman and Batman. Hell, I even love Broadway shows like West Side Story and Phantom of the Opera. I've recorded another short podcast episode where I talk about the power of telling stories. If you have listened to me for any length of time, you also know that I was a founding member of a group of entrepreneurs known as the Arete Syndicate. The concept of that group was very greatly influenced by the founders' interest in ancient Greek and Roman culture. In fact, arete was the cardinal virtue of Greek and Roman culture. Arete means excellence. So, I often reflect on how formative it was for me to be a part of the Arete Syndicate, and that is what keeps me returning to the ancient Greek and Roman myths again and again. There is so much value for overachievers in these ancient stories. Killer lessons for entrepreneurs. So, here I am again talking about another myth. Today, I want to talk about the myth of the Trojan Horse. In my mind, there are two main lessons for overachievers and entrepreneurs in this story. I'll tell you what they are, but let me run down the story for you first. The story of the Trojan Horse is one of the most famous tales from ancient Greek mythology. It takes place during the Trojan War, a conflict between the Greeks and the people of Troy. The Trojan War started when Paris, a prince of Troy, fell in love with Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Paris took Helen back to Troy, and this made the Greeks really, really pissed. They wanted Helen back, so they sailed to Troy to fight for her. Side note, men literally fight wars over beautiful women, because men are sometimes fucking stupid. Anyway, this war lasted for 10 years. During those 10 years, neither side could really defeat the other. The Trojans had strong walls around their city that kept the Greeks from getting in. And the Greeks were determined not to give up ever. Both sides lost a ton of men, but neither wanted to give up. So after fighting for so long without success, the Greeks came up with a new plan. Odysseus, pretty much the most badass of the Greek leaders, had this idea. Instead of continuing to fight the Trojans, he said, let's trick them. He said, let's build a huge wooden horse and leave it outside the gates of Troy. This horse will be hollow so that our soldiers can hide inside of it. Then the rest of our Greek army can pretend to leave, making it seem like we have given up and sailed home. A huge wooden horse, one of Odysseus' soldiers probably said. I fucking love it. To which Odysseus no doubt responded, that's what she said. All right, look, just kidding. Anyways, back to the story. Well, the Greeks worked together to build the giant wooden horse. When it was finished, they hid a group of their best soldiers inside. Afterwards, the rest of the Greek army packed up their camps, got on their ships, and sailed away. But they didn't actually go very far. They hid their ships behind an island nearby, waiting for the right moment to return. When the Trojans woke up the next morning, they were surprised to see that the Greeks were just gone, vanished. All that was left outside their city was an enormous wooden horse. The Trojans, they didn't know what to think. Some thought it might be a trap, but others believed it was a gift from the Greeks. They thought they might have left it behind as a symbol of their surrender. After all, the Greeks had been trying to get into Troy for 10 years straight without success. Maybe they had finally given up. One Trojan priest named Laocoon warned the Trojans not to trust the horse. He famously said, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," meaning that even though it seemed like a gift, it could still be dangerous. Unfortunately for him, the gods sent a pair of sea serpents to kill him, which made the other Trojans believe that Laocoon was wrong and that the horse was safe. I don't know if you know much about Greek gods, but they don't always act exactly in the best interest of human beings. You gotta think that they heard what Laocoon said and thought, man, fuck that guy. Let's mess things up so that the plot thickens and this story gets more interesting to watch from Mount Olympus. Send some sea snakes to go fuck him up. And with that, with Laocoon out of the way, the Trojans decided to bring the horse into the city. The horse was so big that the Trojans had to tear down part of their own wall to bring it inside. And once it was in, they celebrated, believing the war was finally over. They danced and sang, and when night came, they fell asleep, thinking that they were safe. But the Trojans, they were not. Late that night, while everyone in Troy was asleep, the Greek ships quietly returned from their hiding place. At the same time, the soldiers hidden inside the wooden horse crept out. They silently opened the gates of Troy, allowing the rest of the Greek army to enter the city. The Greeks then attacked while the Trojans were sleeping and unprepared. They fucking slaughtered everyone. So yeah, the surprise attack worked perfectly. The Greeks destroyed the city of Troy, and after years of fighting, they finally won the war. Hot Helen of Troy was returned to her husband, and the Greeks sailed home in victory. So, in my mind, there are two important lessons for overachievers and entrepreneurs here. First, things are not always what they seem. At first glance, the giant wooden horse appeared to be a gift, possibly a peace offering from the Greeks after a decade of war. The Trojans, really wanting to believe the conflict was over, let their guard down and accepted the horse, unaware of the danger hidden inside. This mistake led to their defeat. This lesson is important in real life and especially in business because we often encounter situations where things aren't as straightforward as they appear. Just because something looks positive on the surface doesn't mean it truly is. This is why I tell everyone, as often as I can, you have to operate your business and your life on facts, not feelings. Without going into detail, a couple years ago, my business partner Brent and I thought we were killing the game with laser hair removal. We had customers flooding in from morning to evening. We were even opening on days off to treat all the clients. It felt like we were killing it, but when we looked at the facts, we hired a CFO and did a deep dive into the numbers. We looked at other costs like staffing and equipment costs and rental costs and that sort of thing and discovered that we were actually losing money with every machine. So we axed laser hair removal service and added products that, based on the facts, actually made us money. Entrepreneurship can be a roller coaster. There are many ups and downs, and along the way, you get really emotionally invested. You cannot operate on what seems good. You cannot succeed if you operate on what feels like a great situation. You have to do your due diligence. You have to investigate. You have to verify. You have to reason through things. You have to operate on the facts. If any of the Trojans would have had the good sense to think, why would the Greeks just suddenly give up, not say anything, and leave us a big giant wooden horse as a gift? Would the Trojans have been slaughtered? If any of the Trojans had said, hey guys, surely that huge motherfucking horse can't be solid wood, right? It's probably hollow, and if it's hollow, what do you think is inside of that thing? Maybe things would have gone differently for the Trojans if they said, you know what, maybe we should burn that thing just in case, because fuck the Greeks and their gifts. Trust me, things are very often not what they seem. Operate on facts, not feelings. The other lesson I think we can learn from this myth is creative problem solving. The Greeks faced a massive problem. After 10 years of fighting, they still couldn't breach the walls of Troy. Instead of continuing with the same approach, fighting a battle that seemed to have no end, they switched tactics. They used their brains instead of their brawn, and they came up with the Trojan Horse plan, which allowed them to sneak inside Troy and win the war. One of our core values at Genesis is innovation. In other words, we're constantly trying to figure out how to do things better. We're constantly trying to determine if there are better solutions to our problems and challenges. There's this quote that a lot of business experts say, and it's really true. What got you here won't get you there. Just because you've been successful operating by certain principles and practices up to this point doesn't mean that those principles and practices are going to bring you success in the future. You cannot ever rest on your laurels. You cannot ever become inflexible in how you operate. There's a great principle I heard on an MFCEO project episode a couple years ago. Be relentless as a freight train, but versatile as a dune buggy. You should be relentless about hard work and perseverance, but you have to be smart. You have to be creative. And if something isn't working, change it up. That requires operating on facts, not feelings. That requires a willingness to try new things. That requires a humble willingness to look stupid as you attempt to figure out a better solution. That requires a risk-taking mentality. But make no mistake, this creative problem-solving mentality is required for anyone who wants to overachieve in life or build a 7, 8, or even 9-figure business. Listen, the reason why I love the Greek and Roman myths is because, yes, they teach invaluable lessons to us if we are serious about achieving happiness and success. But beyond that, these stories present human existence as an epic. They remind us that what we're doing every day in life and work is bigger than just offering products and services and hoping we're killing it in the black and not drowning in the red. There's a great quote from the movie Troy, which tells the story of Odysseus and Achilles and Hector and the Trojan War. This quote opens the movie, and I'm going to close this podcast episode with it to give you something to think about. Men are haunted by the vastness of eternity, and so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the centuries? Will strangers hear our names long after we are gone and wonder who we were, how bravely we fought, how fiercely we loved?